Hello guys, welcome to Pharma Guru. I know you all will be surprised that why I am back too soon. Yes, I have uploaded the first pass metabolism in the previous video a day before yesterday. Okay, I know I am way too soon, but I am here because a great outbreak has been observed in the pandemic of COVID-19. And what it has been, we all know, we all have seen it in the social medias and the newspapers within the past 2 days. That is the use of dexamethasone, a glucocorticosteroid drug that is a very cheap drug that we used to use very commonly, is proving itself very effective for the treatment of COVID-19. So now why this discussion is being taking place is a trial group known as the recovery group. The trial is being carried out in UK. So a trial group, that is the recovery group, is doing clinical trials and studies on many drugs to be proving effective towards the COVID-19. And one among those biggest list of drugs is the dexamethasone. Now when this group conducted the study on dexamethasone, it proved very effective compared to all those drugs that have been under trial till this date. So dexamethasone has proved itself to be better among all the other drugs. Now why is it so? Now how this study proved itself is, this group of people used dexamethasone 6 mg daily on a single dose, either as orally or as the intravenous route. So dexamethasone 6 mg orally or intravenously was administered to the subject. So what they did is that they randomized total subjects into two groups. One group that was supposed to be treated with dexamethasone, second group that was supposed to be treated with the standard care system. Okay, in the dexamethasone group 2104 subjects were included, whereas in the standard care group 4321 subjects were included. After that, these subjects were again stratified into subjects who are not on oxygen, that is the patient has been confirmed with COVID-19, but till now they are not so serious that they have to be put on oxygen therapy. Second one, the one that are just on oxygen, that is they have oxygen supply through mask and all that. And the third one is the patients who are on ventilation. So the stratification was, first one not on oxygen, second one just on oxygen, and third one ventilator. Now what actually happened is, when dexamethasone was provided to these people and only standard care was given to these people, the mortality rate changed. How? See, when dexamethasone was given to people who are not on oxygen, the mortality rate among those patients was 16% in dexamethasone treated patient, whereas it was only 13% in standard care patients. So what is observed, that whenever the patient is not on oxygen and if we provide dexamethasone, there is not much benefit in reducing the mortality. There is not much difference. But when the same dexamethasone 6 mg daily was provided to the patients who were just on oxygen means there was applied oxygen only through the mask, the mortality rate in the standard care people was 25%, but interestingly there was a decrease of around 5% in mortality rate when it was observed in case of dexamethasone group. And on a higher note, on the patients who were on ventilator, the standard care group showed a 41% mortality, but when dexamethasone was given to the group who were on ventilator, the mortality was just 27%, means there is a great reduction in the mortality rate, right? So this is why dexamethasone is in the headlines today, that it is proving effective in order to decrease the mortality of COVID-19. It is not a drug that is going to cure COVID-19. Instead, it is a drug that is going to reduce the mortality. See, the patients who are on oxygen, 5% reduction, and the patient who were on ventilation, around I think 13-14% reduction in the mortality. Not much was seen in patients who were not on oxygen, but this is a very good news, and these statistics proves that dexamethasone till now is the best drug that can be opted in the future for controlling COVID-19 condition. Now what actually dexamethasone is? We will be covering what dexamethasone is and how is the mechanism of dexamethasone occurring in our body. See, actually dexamethasone comes in a class of drugs known as glucocorticosteroids. Now what are glucocorticosteroids? We will start from the basics. Okay, this is a kidney, and on the upper side of the kidney we have a gland that is known as the adrenal gland. This is the adrenal gland. Okay, now whenever there is an inflammatory condition or an infectious condition in our body is capable, or instead I should say specifically that the adrenal gland is capable of producing natural glucocorticoids. And what are those glucocorticoids that are naturally produced by the adrenal gland? Known as cortisol. So cortisol is the natural glucocorticoid that our body or the adrenal gland specifically can produce against whenever there is an infection or inflammation in our body. Now this cortisol, one thing that we should know, is a lipid soluble agent. The cortisol is actually lipid soluble. Now this makes an interesting concept to arise. See, whenever the cortisol or whenever there is an inflammatory or infectious condition in the body, the adrenal gland releases cortisol, and the cortisol has to directly enter into the systemic circulation. Now, since the cortisol is lipid soluble, it will be difficult to transfer the cortisol throughout the systemic circulation to the body. For that, we do have a carrier protein. This is that carrier protein, and it is known as transcortin. That is TRANSCOURTIN. The transcortin is a carrier protein for what? For cortisol. And this transcortin will carry the cortisol without getting dissolved throughout the systemic circulation to different parts of the body. And one thing interesting is that, and very good for further treatment, is that the dexamethasone is available both as tablet and injectable, which makes it much more easier for treatment. So that's all the basic things about dexamethasone. What is adrenal gland? What is the natural glucocorticoid we have, that is cortisol, which is lipid soluble, which is carried by a carrier protein known as transcortin throughout the body. We do have dexamethasone. See, one more thing is that the glucocorticoids that we commonly use are the hydrocortisone, and prednisolone, along with dexamethasone. So that's all we have right now. Now we will get into actually what is the action of dexamethasone, how it is reducing the inflammatory and the infectious condition. Okay guys, now let us see that how actually these drugs, these glucocorticoid drugs, whether it be hydrocortisone, prednisone or dexamethasone that we are talking about, or the naturally occurring glucocorticoid by the adrenal gland, that is the cortisol, how does that help us in reducing the inflammation? And in order to understand how do they act, we should know actually what inflammation does to the body. So whenever there is a pain, an inflammation or an infection to the body, this will trigger a response in the cell and will activate most of the cells. This condition will activate the NF-κB, that is nuclear factor kappa B, that is nuclear factor kappa B. And what this nuclear factor kappa B will do, it will activate the genes present inside the cell to produce mRNAs, right? So what actually happens, that whenever there is an infection, pain or inflammation, a stimulation comes to the cell that will activate the nuclear factor kappa B to produce mRNA. The nuclear factor kappa B will activate the genes present in the cell to produce mRNA. After that, what happens? There is translation. The translation of these mRNA will lead to the synthesis or the production of the inflammatory cytokines. And what does, as always, the inflammatory cytokines do? The inflammatory cytokines will end up giving inflammation, that is kind of pain, redness, swelling, all that. So actually what happens in normal situation, in normal infection, pain or inflammation inside our body, it will stimulate the cell surface, which will activate the nuclear factor kappa B. The nuclear factor kappa B will in turn activate the genes present inside the cell to produce mRNA, right? And these mRNAs will translate to form the inflammatory cytokines, and these inflammatory cytokines will result in inflammation. What are the inflammatory cytokines such as interleukin 1, interleukin 6, TNF alpha? This will result in inflammation. Now, what is the role of glucocorticoids, whether it be hydrocortisone, prednisolone, or be dexamethasone? What happens is that these drugs will enter into the cell, right? The glucocorticoid drugs, all the drugs that we have discussed, will enter into the cell and will bind with a specific receptor that is known as glucocorticoid receptors, right? This will bind to the glucocorticoid receptors, and this entity or this molecule will bind to the nuclear factor kappa B and inhibit the nuclear factor kappa B. Now, when these entity, that is the glucocorticoid entering into the cell, binding with glucocorticoid receptor, inhibit the nuclear factor kappa B, what will happen? There will be no activation of the genes to produce mRNA. Now, when there is no mRNA, no translation will take place. When there is no translation, no inflammatory cytokines, and hence there will be reduced inflammation, right? One more thing that is concerned with glucocorticoids is, what glucocorticoids can do is that we know the cell surface is made up of phospholipid membrane, right? Yeah. So in majority of the cell membrane, that is a phospholipid, or in case of WBC, there are phospholipid membrane. And what actually happens is that in inflammatory conditions, this phospholipid membrane is converted into arachidonic acid. Is converted into arachidonic acid by an enzyme known as phospholipase A2. Right? In inflammatory conditions, the phospholipid membrane of most of the cells, especially the WBCs, are converted into arachidonic acid by an enzyme known as phospholipase A2. And this arachidonic acid, in the presence of an enzyme that is COX, we all know COX, that is cyclooxygenase. Under the influence of this enzyme, this arachidonic acid is converted into prostaglandins. We generally term it as PG, PG1, PGE2, interleukins, IL-1, IL-2, IL-6, and the thromboxanes. And these prostaglandins, leukotrienes, and thromboxane are the inflammatory mediators. And this way also inflammation and inflammatory conditions can occur. So what glucocorticoids do is that in this condition, the glucocorticoids can inhibit both phospholipase A2 as well as COX. So when these glucocorticoids will inhibit the phospholipase A2, arachidonic acid will not be synthesized, which will not lead to the production of inflammatory mediators. Or when COX is inhibited, the arachidonic acid itself will not be converted into the inflammatory mediators. So these are the process by which these glucocorticoids, whether it be hydrocortisone, prednisolone, or what we say that the hero of the moment, that is a dexamethasone, inhibits inflammation inside our body. So this is a very good news that the dexamethasone is proving to be reducing the mortality among COVID-19 patients. I will be back to you whenever there is any further better updates on COVID-19 or dexamethasone. Till then, stay safe, take care, and keep learning.